Yes, amen. Give her a hand. Good morning. It's a great day to be in community together, yes? We are talking this month about spirituality and spiritually motivated moral leadership. How about that? It's about time, isn't it? Well, this is the last of the 10 prophetic justice principles, and it's the focus that Centers for Spiritual Living, our parent denomination and organization, chose as the theme for this year. And so I want to take a moment, because you might not be aware of what all of them are that we have covered. And I don't know what you're doing before I got here, but I was teaching from these principles, these themes in Portland, and continued on here. So I want to review all 10 of them, the 10 prophetic justice principles from the Reverend James Forbes, retired from Riverside Church in New York City. He wrote these, I think I've mentioned it a few times, he wrote these back in 2004, I think it was around 2004, when he was going on a speaking tour, and he knew he was talking to both liberal and conservative audiences on the political spectrum, on the religious spectrum, and he challenged himself to see if he could speak from a place of speaking about a common set of principles that would draw together the left and the right spiritually, politically, because he was really convinced that what we needed was a common way to talk about the challenges that we face. And so this is what he came up with. The first one, seek the common good. Number 2, to be truthful in facts and motives. Number 3, to promote unity and inclusion. Number 4, to care for the poor. 5, protect the vulnerable. 6, guard freedom of thought and discussion. 7, respect other nations and people. 7, ensure the stewardship of creation. I think that was 8. 9, cherish the human family. And 10, provide moral leadership. And so I think that's a pretty good framework and lens to look through the world and say, can we do those things? Can we bring those things into our spirituality? Can we bring those things into our lens that we are looking at things that are going on politically, things that are going on environmentally, from the human family, from all perspectives? And so this month, these next couple of weeks, I'll be talking about how we provide spiritually motivated moral leadership. And today, to talk specifically about spirituality, what does that mean to come from a basis that is called, that we identify ourselves as more spiritual than religious, which I gather most people in this room probably identify. Am I right? You identify yourself as more spiritual than religious. In fact, a number of years ago, that term, spiritual but not religious, kind of gathered a lot of steam and concerned the traditional religious community. And so I want to talk a little bit about that as well. Most of us gather here today to have a deeper spiritual connection to life, to identify ourselves with that thing that we call spiritual, more over than the thing that we would identify as religious. Some say that this trend is bad news for communities, church communities, centers, or whatever you want to call them. But the truth is, I couldn't disagree with that statement more. I think that the trend of those who identify as spiritual but non-religious and those who identify more with their spirituality than their religiosity is a part of the awakening of humanity to its spiritual magnificence. And I have a conviction that what we offer is more important than it ever has been before. Let me tell you why. Several times when I came here, before you hired me, I spoke from this book, Creating a World That Works for All by Sharif Abdullah. It's where Centers for Spiritual Living got their theme, their vision, way back in, I think, 2002, when he was the speaker at one of our conventions in San Diego. And at that convention, I met him, I bought the book, I was the first in line to get it signed and said, we need to talk. I had just started my ministry in Portland, so it must have been 2004. And I said, I want to bring this idea into what we're establishing here. And so I'm delighted to kind of have a restart with all of you. So I get to start all over and say, I'm going to bring this in. So this would be one of the books that we'll focus on in 2020. It'll be a book study. So you have a chance to dive deep into it. But I want to bring some of the things out for today's message. He begins by talking about a vision. I'm going to skip over that part and talk about the problem that he says that we are in, the nightmare. A world on a brink is the name of the chapter. And he says, our society and personal problems are so fundamental, nightmarish, complex, and interlocked that they are incapable of being addressed with our current techniques of problem solving. These challenges are so difficult to grasp, in part because we do not have a word that defines them. In his classic book, The Timeless Way of Building, the master architect Christopher Alexander referred to a quality in our lives that is a source of our aliveness, our beauty, our creativity, and joy of living. He called it the quality without a name, since it was impossible to render it into words. But although we cannot name it, we can know it. But there is an equal and opposite quality to the one Alexander identifies. It is the quality of our pain, our ugliness, our cynicism, our brutality, our cold-heartedness, our violence. Alexander would probably call it the problem without a name. I call it the mess. And then the page I've often referred to in this book, page 30. He says, every year, scores of respected research institutions give us their latest update on how much closer to crisis our world has come. From the World Watch Institute, the Hunger Project, Amnesty International, World Resource Institute, Oxfam, Doctors Without Borders, UNICEF, the Human Rights Watch, literally dozens more like them, we get a composite picture of the depth and the magnitude of the mess. They each report on one aspect of it. You are no doubt already aware of their work. And then he says the mess includes, and I'm not going to read all of it because it's long on page 30, but I've referred to it often. Population explosion, suicide, holes in the ozone layer, political apathy and malice, attention deficit disorder, unsustainability in all aspects of life, increasing disparity in wealth, and wealth-poverty gap, racism, wage slavery, civil wars, public school violence, crime, child labor, industrial pollution, on the list goes. And he says that the mess is a mess and cannot be solved because we live in a society that is spiritually starved. We live in a society that not only is spiritually starved, but a society that thrives, and its economy is based on keeping us spiritually starved. That is, that we consume and feed ourselves with things that we'll never be able, as is taught in the Buddhist tradition, the concept of the hungry ghost. Anybody know the concept of the hungry ghost? The hungry ghost in Buddhism is this a ghost, this being that has a massive appetite and a pinhole for a mouth. So it can never be consumed. It can never be full. It can never consume enough in order to satiate its appetite. And that is the spiritual starvation that we have in our society that says, buy this, do that, acquire this, do all of these things. And we chase all of those things in materialism and capitalism, but they never satisfy the depth of our soul. At the same time, religion typically and traditionally has failed to provide us with an answer to that satisfaction, mainly because it has exported the solution to an external happening that has nothing to do with the spiritual awakening within us and everything to do with belonging to the right group of people. But belonging to the right group of people is just more of the spiritual starvation, you see. And so as this group called spiritual but not religious has grown and grown and grown, people have begun to break free and wake up from the illusion and from the hypnotic trance that even the world religion community creates for us. Then they say, well, I'm not going to identify with anything. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm just going to stay home. I'm just going to cultivate. I'm going to walk among the trees, which is a good thing to do, by the way. I'm going to, just do my own thing. Trust me, we have that issue in Oregon. It was like, everybody's like, where's your church? So they're like, outdoors. That's great, but, it rains a lot, so come on in. Right? But there is something within that starvation, there's something within that hunger of humanity that has never gone away and will continue to call us forward into community, will continue to call us forward into a depth of understanding ourselves. Are you following what I'm saying? I believe that what is attempting to be born in this, what I would call extremely dangerous yet creative and fertile time, is a new humanity. A new humanity that is directly in direct, unmediated contact with the divine wisdom of the ages of the universe, free of divisiveness, body hatred, oppression, a humanity that no longer violates its covenant with the earth or its neighbor, that turns from the original sin of forgetting who we are and awakens to its passionate potential and its radical responsibility towards all living things. That's what's trying to be birthed. And that thing can't be solved by commercial breaks. It can't be solved by holiday sales. It can only be solved when we're in community with one another, and we're in exploration of the depth and the soul power of who and what we are. Ernest Holmes gave us something profound in a spiritual teaching that transcended religious dogma and yet had a deep respect for the wisdom that is in all traditions. And it's there in that middle ground, that transcend and include principle that Ken Wilber would talk about, the transcending of dogma or restriction or limitation, but also including wisdom. That is where the magic and the mastery is of spiritual awakening. Holmes says the secret of spiritual power is a consciousness of one's union with the whole and availability of good. We are one with a universal creativeness, which is the God of theology, the spirit of mysticism, the reality of philosophy, and the principles of science. God is accessible in all ways to all people. And so, isn't it kind of strange to be in spiritual community and talk about this awakening that is kind of beyond religion? Yes, it is. Thanks for asking. I have colleagues that have told me you just need to get out of the business because that's a dying thing, and I've said no. And I live out in a part of the suburbs here where I've got a couple of mega churches just right down the street. And yesterday we were running some errands and doing some things, and even on Friday, and these places are big, such that they have the traffic cops out, and on Friday night I was like, really? They got a Friday night service too? They're on Friday night? And then yesterday, like all day yesterday, I was like, what are they doing over there? I'm trying to get to the mall. I thought, well, they must be doing something progressive over there. So I looked them up. I thought maybe, but no. It's all smoke and mirrors. But anyway, I think that's not the point of my talk today. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on and get myself out of trouble here. Here's the thing. If we have any ounce of sincerity and regard for the vision of creating a world that works for all, then we better quickly realize that we're not a private social club of like-minded souls that are here to sup on spiritual platitudes. You and I are participating in something much deeper than that, much more important than that, much more profound than that, much more significant than that. And yeah, we have challenges, and I put a post online this last week, and a lot of people reached out. They said, "Oh God, he's tipping over." Because I did a thing about overwhelm and clergy being overwhelmed. All clergy are overwhelmed. So, but we've got bills to pay. We've got equipment we want to upgrade. We've got staffing things. We've got open seats on the board. Of course, we're an organization. We've got all those things going on. But what we're about here is so much more beyond all of that. And what is important at the heartbeat of what's going on here requires so much more than just a few dollars in the plate. There's such a depth of commitment that I want you to find here, because I have that conviction. I have more conviction about what we're up to than I ever have in my 15 years of doing this kind of work. But let us back up for a moment to realize that we're going somewhere with this. The thing that we're about, the essential ingredient in awakening of humanity is called spirituality. And the mystics of every age have known this. Ernest Holmes knew this. I feel this. You and I know this. And so today I want to explore and break down a couple of myths about spirituality. One, the first myth is that spirituality doesn't need community. The idea that, well, I can just be spiritual so I don't have to go to church. I don't need to be part of anything because I'm spiritual. We're going to deal with that one. And number two, that spirituality is better than religion. You might identify with one or both of those. Probably not the first one because you're here, so that's good. But you might know someone. But we're going to look at both of those. And so a number of years ago, when I did a blog about the spiritual but not religious, when this was all kicking up, this was about 10 years ago, and it was getting a lot of press, and church folks, traditional church folks, were talking about it in a way that was, we got to be worried and concerned, and so I was in dialogue with a number of traditional church folks and wrote some blogs about it, and I'm going to read some excerpts of some of that because I wanted to break down a few things about the importance of spiritual awakening that has been happening, particularly in America, over 150 years, that has always been about being more spiritual than religious, and it is something that has fueled and inspired the continued progression of traditional Christianity in particular, just as much as it has of the movement outside of religion. But first, let's talk about the conflict, if you will, or what appears as a conflict. The spiritual but non-religious among us do not reject religion as much as we reject dogma. Dogma that has too often been defined and promoted by organized religion. Dogma that has oppressed the weakest among us. Dogma that has suppressed the holy and divine feminine, making it shameful and wrong. Dogma that has made a mockery of Scripture by using it to defend racism, homophobia, sexism, classism. Dogma that has the audacity to put conditions on things like grace and love and mercy and even salvation, which Jesus so freely gave to all. Dogma that helped produce religious institutions so unlike the name and nature of the man Jesus and the ministry of Jesus that the Son of Man himself would be hard-pressed to recognize it, much less defend it, if he were to come back today. So please forgive us if I too am spiritual but not religious. Forgive us for looking outside of the institution that has so often failed to exemplify the simplest elements of its own creed, to love thy neighbor. Forgive us for looking into nature to find God's nature. Forgive us that while we were on this seemingly self-indulgent path of personal discovery, we in fact discovered Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, the Christ principle. And please forgive us if we discovered that our encounters were far more real, authentic, and transformative than anything we previously experienced in church. Am I talking to anybody today? And forgive us if we happen to notice that this seems to be the path that Jesus took as well. Remember from the narrative that he disappeared from age 12 to about 30, and when he reappeared, he was not touting the virtues of religious community. In fact, quite the opposite. He railed against the institutions of his day, of their dogma, of their rules, of their authoritative judgments over society, and he sought his own personal relationship with God. So personal that he called him Abba, Father. So personal that this connection was not made through a creed or a book or a prayer or a temple, but in fact was closer than his breath and dwelled right there within him. Forgive us for thinking that it was not self-indulgent for him to do so. Forgive us for noticing that in fact Jesus was spiritual but not religious. And while you consider forgiving us for these transgressions, take note of the following. Spiritual but not religious people do not deny or reject the power of being and growing and learning in community. In fact, a more loving, inclusive, charitable community that is working towards a world that works for everyone is something that we all care deeply about. And take note that the loudest voices against religious institutions have often been calls that have been coming from inside the house. Voices that have been a source of positive evolutionary change. Voices that have called upon us to be more spiritual and less religious. Some of those voices, the one that I often quote when I talk about this topic, Henry Emerson Fosdick, a Baptist minister from New York City who I've shared with you before that had Rockefeller build him the Riverside Church in New York City, in which, and this is a long sermon of his that I pulled up, so I have to, there I go, find the right passage, in very small text on my iPad. And he said this in 1922 in a sermon entitled, "Shall the Fundamentalist Win?" He says, "As I plead thus for an intellectual, hospitable, tolerant, liberal-loving church," this is a Baptist minister, by the way, a Baptist movement which is very different than it is today. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. "I am, of course, thinking primarily about this new generation. We have boys and girls growing up in our homes and in schools, and because we love them, we may well wonder about the church that is waiting to receive them. Now, the worst kind of church that can possibly be offered to the allegiance of this new generation is an intolerant church. Ministers often bewail the fact that a young person turns from religion to science for the regulative ideas of their lives. But this can be easily explained. Science treats a young man's mind as though it were really important. A scientist says to a young man, 'Here is the universe challenging our investigation. Here are the truths that we have seen thus far. Come, study with us, see what we have already seen, and look to see even more. For science is an intellectual adventure for the truth.' Can you imagine any man who is worth their while turning from that call to the church if the church seems to say to them, 'Come, and we will feed you opinions from a spoon'? No thinking is allowed here except though that thinking which brings you to certain specified, predetermined conclusions. These pre-described opinions we will give you in advance of your thinking. Now think, but only so as to reach those same results." 1922. Or perhaps Bishop John Shelby Spong, who I call lovingly Uncle Jack, because he's the uncle of one of our practitioners in Portland, and have had the great pleasure of being with several times, said this in Why Christianity Must Change or Die. He doesn't mince words when he titles his books, by the way. You know exactly what you're buying when you pick it up. He says, "So it needs to be said clear that the God presence of this Jesus will lead us ultimately beyond every religious definition. Indeed, it will lead us beyond Jesus himself. That becomes essential to human development. Whatever our idolatrous convictions identify the messenger of God with God. So the ground of being will finally be worshipped apart from any system of religious thought. It is a startling but real insight into the future of worship." Moving beyond and yet transcending yet including the wisdom of all. Or my favorite, Paul Tillich, who says, "The importance of being Christian is that we can stand in the insight that it is of no importance. It is the spiritual power of religion that he who is religious can fearlessly look into the vanity of religion. It is the maturest fruit of Christianity, of Christian understanding, to understand that Christianity as such is to no avail." In other words, he says, Christianity is not about Christianity. It's about a new way of being. And until we embrace that new way of being, we're simply being idolatrous. So, the first myth, which is that spirituality doesn't need community. Yes, that's the first one. What we discover is that there's something pushing within the humanity, and that spirituality, that spiritual quest to connect with that which is something bigger than us, actually requires community for us to find it with each other. Because we're not defined by ourselves alone, but we're defined by how we are in relationship to one another. And so no matter how much the growing disdain for the religion that's been described here continues to grow, people will still find ways to get together and say, "I see you, I honor you, and through you I find myself in service, in love." And so what I'm so excited about building and creating here is something that transcends all of that other stuff, but still provides a place that is so attractive to our spiritual growth, a place where we connect, a place where we give and grow, a place where we serve, a place where we begin to transcend the everyday worries and concerns because they begin to get solved by our spiritual understanding of who and what we really are. And as we give ourselves away to each other. Doesn't that sound good? Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Victoria. Appreciate it. The British like it. One more aspect of this. The world will not be served by more communities of us and them. In fact, the divisive separation that humanity has created can only be served by a spiritual insight and revelation that there really is only one community, one global community of humanity in which we are all stuck with each other. Did you know that? Did you know you're stuck with each other? Turn to your neighbor and say, I'm stuck with you. So we better learn how to do this together, right? And you notice, some of you might notice whatever that triggers for you, some desire to pull away and say, no, I want to do this by myself. They're coming for me. The second myth, that spirituality is better than religion. I want us to be cautious as we go forward. I believe the spiritual transcendence of dogma that restricts and binds, but that spirituality is not better than religion. You see, the thing that will drive us forward, the rules for the road of what's next to come are these. Everything that divides one human being from another or from nature must be revealed as the convenient societal, cultural, and religious fiction that it is. That's the first rule. Now I'll say it again, amen? Everything that divides one human being from another or from nature must be revealed as the convenient societal, cultural, or religious fiction that it is. That's the first rule for where we're going in a spiritual-based world and spiritual morality. The second rule, everything that in any way disempowers, depresses, or divides the power of consciousness innate in every human being must be unmasked as a lie of power. And so those first two are about breaking things down so that we can get to the heart of what's really alive within us and alive within all of humanity. But the third one is where we move into the inclusion. The first two are about transcending and breaking down that which is no longer serving us. But the third one is about, there's only three rules to remember. The third one is everything that provides authentic help and truth and wisdom must be embraced and fused with every other source of awareness, of empowerment, to provide the human race in this hour of this danger and need, the resources for an integral wisdom. So everything that provides authentic help, truth, and wisdom must be embraced and fused with every other source of awareness and empowerment to provide the human race with the resources of an integral wisdom. In other words, to the degree that we find value in religious, cultural traditions, in the faith stories of all of the world's religions, and they all have value within them, then they must also be embraced, even as the dogma of restriction is transcended. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. Spirituality is not an either or, it's a both and. It's about bringing in. That's why I love spiritual communities like this, because I get to say to people, if you're Catholic, bring your Catholicism with you. I'll serve you communion. I'll dress up and wear the stuff. It's okay. I've got a collar. I do. I've even got a purple one for the communities that call me bishop, and there are those that do. I won't wear it here because it'll freak you out, but I'll wear. I did that once in my old community. I don't think they ever got over it. But in the certain settings that I'm in, where that view is casted upon me, and as a form of respect, I'll show up in that way, right? If you're Baptist, bring your Baptist with you. If you're Pentecostal, bring your Pentecostal. If you're Jewish, bring your Jewish with you. If you're Buddhist, bring your Buddhist with you. Bring it all in the door, because what we're teaching is something that enlivens and adds flavor to all of that. And so we get to bring all of that wisdom in our worship, in our prayer, in our music, in our decor, and everything that we're about, so that we're celebrating each other, and we're also connecting with something that's transcendent and beyond all of that. You see, that's the beauty of it. You see, if we think that our spirituality is better than our religion, we've simply traded one for the other, and you've made spirituality your religion. I'll say that again. If you think your spirituality is better than religion, then you've simply traded one for the other, and you've made your spirituality your religion. Your spirituality should allow you to embrace the religious traditions of all paths. Whether you identify with them or not, whether they're part of your culture or not, it should allow you to appreciate and allow yourself to be infused by the wisdom of everything that has come. Because there is only one power, one consciousness infused within all of humanity, and it has spoken in every age, in every tongue, in every tribe, in every culture, through every holy book, through every sacred ritual, through every prayer, through every desire that humanity has had to connect with the divine. That thing which cannot be contained, but is always seeking expression in, through, and as us. So our spirituality journey and the case for building a moral society is to come from a place of honoring all of that and being in a place where we connect with it in our own way and grow because we're in relationship with each other. Are you game for that? Should we do that together? I'm going to save the rest for next week. Because I'm excited about where we're going and what we're doing. I want to say this. I want to say that, as I said before, there are times that there is overwhelm in ministry and in this work, but we are just getting started. I haven't even been here 6 months yet. So I'm just learning my ropes a little bit, learning what we're doing and what we're up against, and both in terms of systems and structures and finances and all of those things. But I want you to be as infused with the conviction that I am, that this is so important, that this work is so important, that what we're doing is so important, not because we need a particular structure, not because we need a particular building, but because the world has a particular spiritual starvation. And we have a place that can answer that and address that, not by converting people, but by lifting people up into their authenticity. Not by denying their religious background, but by enhancing their religious understanding if they have one. And if they don't, that's okay too, because we can show them the menu of options and the ways to express them. So that's what we're up for here, and it's going to take all of us to lean in, and I'm excited. I've been visioning and planning some things for 2020 and beyond. We'll get through the holidays and our birthday and celebrate and love on each other, and then we're going to hit the ground running in January. And so lean in, because where we're going is somewhere that we haven't been yet. Amen? All right. Let's pray. Let me invite the practitioners to join me in prayer in this moment. Just stand and take a position somewhere in the room where people can feel your presence as we create a collective consciousness and a collective space. And we begin with the breath. And I allow and invite you to allow my words to be your words as I pray in the first person, connecting with the power of divinity that is bigger than I am. This is what I know. There is one power, one presence, one life, one infinite energy of divine wisdom that is constantly seeking to express itself into and as all things, and that includes me, that includes this moment, that includes this place. And so I'm so grateful for this day and for this opportunity to stand in this place, to feel the breath and to feel the power of community coursing through my veins and my body. I know that I am one with a dynamic presence that says yes to this universal life and expression. And it is here to admit a transcendent reality, a transcendent spirituality that I am now intimately one with. In doing so, there is a divine revelation taking place in my consciousness, a revelation of the power of this spirit, power of this wisdom in my life, that I may harness the power of this infinite wisdom to bring revelation and insight and growth and transformation to every aspect of living, to my body temple and to my relationships and to my work and to my connections and to every aspect of who and what I am. And I know this to be the truth for myself, as I know it to be the dynamic truth for every individual within the sound of my voice here and now, that there is a lifting up that is taking place, a thirst that is being quenched by the infinite stream of God's wisdom and grace and beauty. And that as we commit to this place, as we commit to this vibration and this participation in spiritual community, we're emanating and radiating into the vibrational field of humanity, all those souls that are still starved for something else, starved and thirsty for something beyond dogma, something beyond restriction, something beyond oppression, something that will liberate them into their highest good and help liberate humanity into its greatest yet to be. Oh, I'm so grateful for this day and for this great awakening that is taking place in through and as me and as you and as everything that we see, feel, and touch. For this and so much more, I say thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you. Peace and blessings.